Something strange happened on television last weekend. A sitting president, the loudest man in America, spent an entire night watching two comedians he claims nobody watches. He called them talentless. He called them finished. He called them nobodies who should have been fired years ago. And then he could not stop talking about them. He posted, he ranted, he raged into the early hours of the morning. Because what those two comedians said behind that desk was not just a joke. It was something he was never supposed to survive. Two men, one desk, a stack of real headlines he himself had created. And by the time they were done, the most powerful man in America looked smaller than he had in years. No shouting, no insults, just his own words, read back to him slowly until the whole country could finally hear how they actually sounded. What you are about to see is the segment the White House wishes had quietly disappeared into the weekend news cycle. It did not. It spread. It multiplied. It turned into the kind of moment people were still quoting days later. And once you hear the lines that landed hardest, you will understand exactly why he could not let it go. The studio lights snapped on with that cold, clinical hum that always tells you the news desk is about to become a courtroom. The weekend update graphic spun across the screen. The music cut hard. The audience settled into their seats the way they always do before this segment. Shoulders loose, eyes sharp, already half smiling, because everyone in that room already knew the truth. Colin Jost and Michael Che were about to walk out with a stack of real headlines in their hands, and every single one of those headlines was going to be left in pieces by the end of the night. The cameras pushed in slow. Jost leaned forward. That little half smile slid across his face. The one that always comes right before the knife. People, he said, always act like they totally get political satire. Right up until two guys at a desk grab a headline that sounds dead serious, twist it the wrong way on purpose, and suddenly nobody can read the original story anymore without hearing the joke echoing inside it. Because what happens on this stage every week, he explained, is not just making fun of Donald Trump for cheap laughs. It is something far more uncomfortable than that. And somehow, at the same time, far more entertaining, because the whole point of what those two men do behind that desk is to take the logic of these headlines and say it out loud, the way a normal human being would actually say it. And the second you do that, the whole thing collapses. The crowd laughed a little nervously, because they already knew the pattern was coming. Jost kicked it off. He announced that today marked the start of the third week of the war in Iran, which, he said, was strange, because somebody had told him the country had already won the war on day one. He paused. He tilted his head. And he said the thing everybody in the room had been quietly thinking for weeks. Usually, when a team wins, they do not stay on the field for 3 more weeks after the final whistle. He added, almost with a shrug, that so far, the main thing that had been accomplished in this so-called victory seemed to be getting rid of one 86-year-old Ayatollah. The room cracked open, because the joke was not really a joke. It was a reset button pressed right in the middle of the broadcast. Suddenly, the whole situation looked different. A war won on day one, but somehow still dragging into week 3. A victory that required more victories. A finish line that kept quietly walking away every time somebody got close to it. Before the crowd could catch its breath, Jost was already moving. He mentioned that Trump had suggested he should personally have a say in choosing Iran's next supreme leader. And without changing his expression, without even pretending to think about it, he congratulated the new supreme leader, Ayatollah Jared Kushlari. The audience roared, because the image arrived instantly. A son-in-law being installed as the spiritual head of a foreign country. It was absurd, it was cartoonish, and strangest of all, it did not feel completely impossible. Jost let the laughter cool. Then he read another line quietly. Somewhere in an interview, he said somebody had described the aging Ayatollah as damaged, but probably alive in some form. He let that sentence float for a moment. Then he looked straight at the camera and calmly pointed out that the exact same description could pretty easily be used for Trump himself. The room broke wide open, not because the line was cruel, but because it was accurate. And accuracy, delivered with a calm face, always lands harder than any shouted insult ever could. Then Jost stacked the biggest joke of the opening on top of all of it. He announced that Trump had declared himself the acting president of Venezuela. He paused. He let the absurdity breathe. He said by next week, Trump would probably be the interim Ayatollah of Iran. And then, eventually, his ultimate goal, head reindeer of Greenland. He mentioned that a congressman had actually, in real life, introduced a bill to make Greenland the 51st state. The audience howled. And then Jost added one small, perfect afterthought. Puerto Rico, he said, is watching all of this and just going, wow, okay. It was one sentence, but it carried the weight of 100 years of strange American history, and the audience felt every pound of it. He kept going. He slipped in a line about being honestly a little jealous that some other country had finally managed to elevate a leader who was not over 80 years old. The audience laughed, but the laughter had an uncomfortable little edge on it. Because buried inside the joke was a very real question about aging leadership that nobody on any side of the aisle seemed especially eager to answer. And then the energy of the room shifted because Michael Che leaned forward. Che does not build jokes the way Jost builds them. Jost is the surgeon. He lays the contradiction out on the table slowly, piece by piece, until everybody in the room can see it breathing in front of them. Che lights a match and throws it. And the contrast between the two of them was exactly what gave this whole segment its rhythm. Che picked up a headline about Trump's tariff policies, the kind of thing that usually lives buried under graphs and long speeches. But Trump had rolled it out with flashy branding and dramatic packaging, including something he had actually named Liberation Day. Che did not even pretend to take the name seriously. He said an economic slowdown from the tariffs could be especially hard on China. Because, he added with a deadpan that felt almost medical, it is not easy to tell a child they are getting laid off. The audience lost it, because in one line, Che had managed to squeeze an entire global economic policy into a single image that felt both ridiculous and uncomfortably honest at the same time. And he was not finished. He pointed out that Trump had imposed tariffs on remote islands that were only inhabited by penguins. He let that sit there. He did not explain it. He did not work the joke. He just let the image do its work. Because sometimes the headline itself is already the punchline. And the only job of the comedian is to hand it back to the audience with a straight face and let reality finish the thought. Then Che pushed further. He brought up Trump framing the economic chaos as some kind of necessary medicine the country had to swallow. But Che refused to play along with the metaphor. He blew it up. He said the country had not taken a normal dose of anything. It had chugged the whole bottle, chased it with alcohol, and now somebody wanted everyone to believe it was all part of a responsible plan. The audience roared again because the image was wild, but the feeling underneath it was something they had quietly been carrying around for months. Then Jost pivoted. A headline about Jeffrey Epstein flickered on the screen behind him. Jost introduced it in that calm, almost sing-song voice he uses whenever the subject is too dark to yell about. He said the Department of Justice had released another batch of Epstein documents. Documents that, in a very, very non-suspicious way, critics had noticed, happened to leave out certain references to Donald Trump. The audience laughed the way people always laugh when they do not really want to laugh, because the absurdity was sitting right there in front of them, refusing to be ignored. He moved to the next story. Somebody had suggested naming a school after Trump, and without even breaking stride, Jost invented a fake mascot for the school, tied directly to every controversy the audience already had memorized. What was supposed to be a clean honor instantly transformed into a running joke about reputation, a joke that wrote itself before he even finished saying it. Che jumped in with a global headline. Kim Jong-un had shown up at a weapons facility with his daughter. Che did not editorialize. He just reduced the whole scene to a casual, ironic label that made the moment sound like a father-daughter field trip to somewhere much more normal than a missile factory. And the audience sat with that for a second, because the point of the joke was not just the laugh, it was how quickly perception changes the instant someone frames a heavy scene with the right words. Back home, the segment treated political replacements like they were barely even important. Candidates were compared to over-the-top cartoon characters. Policy was barely mentioned, and it reinforced something the audience already felt in their bones. Modern politics had stopped feeling like governance. It had started feeling like non-stop performance, non-stop casting decisions, non-stop reruns. Then Jost hit them with what was probably the sharpest line of the whole segment. He said that being singled out as the worst member of Trump's cabinet was a little like having somebody walk up to you at a party and quietly say, "We think you should leave. You are making Diddy uncomfortable." The room detonated because the line did two things at once. It captured the chaos of the administration, and it captured the hierarchy of controversy, all in a single image. Then came the reassignment joke. Jost announced that Trump was moving Kristi Noem to a new position. He described the new title with a straight face, Special Envoy of the Shield of the Americas. It sounded important. It sounded official, and everybody in the audience understood instantly that it was just a polite way of saying somebody was being pushed very far away from the room where decisions happen. It was the oldest move in the political book. Give the exile a shiny name. Send them far away. Hope nobody notices. And underneath all of this, Jost and Che kept circling back to the same theme. The theme that held the entire segment together. So much of this political moment, they kept showing, runs on pure branding, catchy slogans, dramatic labels, fake peace prizes, liberation days, boards of peace, councils of destruction. The whole thing depends on selling a story. And the comedy keeps landing because the two men behind that desk keep taking the phrases literally. They test them. They turn them over in the light. They ask the small, simple questions that a regular person would ask if a regular person were allowed to speak into the microphone. Jost pulled up another one. He announced that Trump had posted a message on Truth Social. The message had said Iran would have a great future. Make Iran great again. Or, as Trump himself had written it, MIGA. Jost paused. He read it again slowly. This MIGA crazy, he said, shaking his head. And he added, deadpan, that Trump had told everyone he had wanted to do that one. The audience collapsed, because it was real. The real ones always hurt the most. Then Jost moved to something heavier, a press conference where Trump had told the country that God was very proud of the job he was doing as president. Jost read it almost reverently, and then he added the twist. Trump had said God was looking down at us and smiling. From horn to hoof, there was a pause. Then it hit. Because Jost had not argued with the claim. He had just reframed it. And once the image of horns and hooves had been placed into the air, it was impossible to unsee. Then he reminded everyone, gently, that Trump had also publicly joked before that he was probably not heaven-bound, and the contradiction sat there in the studio like a third guest nobody had invited. Jost added one more, almost under his breath. If Trump really wanted to be Pope, he said, he should probably stay away from J.D. Vance. The audience howled. Che picked up a different headline. He said Trump had responded to a report showing the economy was declining by posting two simple words, "Be patient." Che paused. He let the joke breathe, and then he said flatly that if Trump's brain got any worse, he was going to be patient. The audience roared again, because sometimes the cruelest comedy is nothing more than a homophone landing in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Then came J.D. Vance. Vance had criticized protesters confronting immigration officers. He had suggested they should express their frustration through more traditional methods, writing opinion pieces, arguing online. Jost did not argue with him. He did not need to. He just reminded the audience of a certain recent moment in American history where a different kind of crowd had chosen a very different method of expressing disagreement. The contrast landed instantly. The inconsistency exposed itself. It always does. Jost followed it with something sharper. He said he knew Trump was upset about not winning the Nobel Peace Prize. But the last guy, he said, to send heavily armed men into an American city was Bane from Batman. Bane, who had also, coincidentally, been snubbed for the Peace Prize. The audience lost it. Then came the Board of Peace. Trump had apparently invited world leaders to join what he was calling a Board of Peace, and he had hinted that anybody who refused might face consequences from something he was calling a Council of Destruction. Jost could barely hold a straight face, because the names alone sounded less like international diplomacy and more like fine print on the back of a comic book. He pointed out that the lineup of this so-called peaceful group included Russia and Saudi Arabia. The imagery alone did most of the work. Che jumped back in. Trump had traveled to the Middle East. He had been greeted with a lavender carpet. Jost observed calmly that it matched both the color of Trump's tie and the length of it, a small surgical cut. Then Che added that a mobile McDonald's truck had been rolled out for the visit, featuring Saudi Arabia's most popular menu item, the Newburg. The audience did not even pretend to hold back anymore. Then Che fully committed to the final bit of the night. He acted out Trump's obsession with Greenland as if it were someone desperately trying to charm a person on a dating app. The messages started friendly, then flattering, then desperate, then finally angry when the response did not come back the way he had hoped. Suddenly, an international acquisition attempt looked exactly like a messy, late-night text thread. Relatable. Ridiculous. A little bit sad. The audience howled with recognition, and Che did not stop there. He announced with a long sigh that he was starting to worry Trump might not win that peace prize after launching a massive military strike against Iran. He said Trump had apparently announced that the country had officially killed the supreme leader and replaced him with, oh my God, the guy from Venezuela. The audience cracked open again because that one single line captured everything: the chaos, the cycle, the strange way these global crises just kept swapping players like actors in the same old show. By the time the segment ended, the rhythm had become almost predictable in the best possible way. Every time a serious claim appeared, the audience already knew that a small twist was coming that would expose just how fragile it really was. Every time a flashy label was rolled out, Jost or Che would test it like a normal person would. And every single time, the label cracked. That was the whole secret. The segment did not work by screaming insults. It worked because the two men behind the desk used Trump's own words and Trump's own actions as the fuel. They just stood there like tour guides in a very strange museum, pointing at the cracks, letting the audience connect the dots. That is what made the mockery feel so effortless. And that is exactly what made it so brutal. The crowd stood and applauded. The cameras pulled back slowly. The studio lights began to dim. And the final frame, two comedians standing behind a desk with a stack of real headlines, felt like something more than just comedy. It felt like a small, stubborn record of a country trying to laugh its way through a moment that almost refused to be laughed at. If this hit you the way it hit that audience, tap the subscribe button right now. Ring the bell so you do not miss the next breakdown. Drop a comment and tell us which line landed the hardest. Because these segments are not just jokes. They are quiet little windows into how power actually sounds when it thinks nobody is listening. And the next one is coming soon. You are not going to want to miss a second of it.